Once upon a time there was a cobbler who was so very poor that often he had no food to eat from morning till night. Even at the best of times, he was glad to make a meal off a few dry crusts and a tiny bit of hard cheese. His home was a little hut at the end of the town. It was so old that it was a wonder it did not tumble down about his ears. Here he lived with his wife and daughter, who both had such bad tempers that they made him more unhappy still. They would scold him all day because he was so poor. Yet they would not help him with his work so that he might earn more. And they never had a smile to give him, nor a kind word to say, that would have cheered him through the long days. The cobbler's daughter was really a pretty girl, but her fair looks were quite spoilt by frowns and pouts. Her name was Sulky Anna, and this name fitted her very well. She nearly always had a sulky face to show. Yet she had nice pink cheeks, if they could have been seen in their proper color. But she hated to wash her face and hands, and did not care if she had a big smut on her nose. She had long golden hair, but most days it was in a tangle, because she would not trouble to comb it out and make it tidy. Nor would she spend any time in mending her clothes, but went about in rags and tatters. She was too lazy to use a needle, and she did not like to sew, or knit, or wash, or iron, or scrub, or do useful work of any kind. She would not even trouble to learn to read and write. Yet she might have become a scholar if she had wished, for her father would have been glad to teach her.
Why should I bother to learn things when there is no one to hear me talk?
She said.
And what is the use of having pink cheeks and golden hair when I may not have pretty gowns to wear? No one ever comes to see me.
She would add with a frown.
I'm sure I don't need to mend my clothes and to make myself tidy when I only live in a hut. Besides, I hate work, and I won't do it anyway.
And never once did this selfish girl stop to think that it would have pleased her poor father to see her neatly dressed. How he would have liked to see her with her face and hands washed, and her pretty hair combed out. Or, better still, she might have cheered him with kind words, and helped her mother to clean the house and cook their poor meals. Instead of this, when the cobbler went into the town to get more shoes to mend, his lazy daughter would lie down on her bed. There she spent her time, idly thinking of the pretty clothes she would buy, and the gay time she would have, if she were rich. And so things went on from bad to worse, and each new day seemed more dreary than the last. And then there came a great change. A most wonderful thing happened, which turned the poor cobbler's night to day. This great event happened one wintry day, when times were very bad indeed with the cobbler. Nipping cold and hunger had made him so sad that he had no heart to work. He had earned no money at all that day, and there was no more food in the house. Besides, Sulky Anna and her mother had done nothing but grumble ever since the morning. As the daylight faded and dusk began to set in, the cobbler had to lay aside his work. He was just about to call to his cross wife to light their last candle when he heard a tap-tap-tapping at the door. It was such a strange thing for anyone to call at the lonely hut that the cobbler ran in haste to see who it could be. On opening the door, he saw that it was only a beggar. There he stood, shivering with the cold, a poor old man dressed in rags and tatters, and so weary that he could hardly stand. As the cobbler stared at his visitor, the beggar cried out,
"Oh, cobbler, cobbler, mend my shoes. I prithee, cobbler, don't refuse. For I have far to go tonight, and my poor shoes are worn out quite."
"But tell me first what money you will pay me, if I do so,"
said the cobbler rather crossly.
"I have earned nothing today, and times are very bad."
"Alas! No money have I got,"
replied the beggar, still more sadly.
I cannot pay you for your work. But if you will take pity on me, good cobbler, and mend my shoes this evening, you will never regret it. A kind deed is worth much gold.
So sad and pitiful did the poor old man look that the cobbler's heart was touched. Though he knew he was to get no pay for his work, he said kindly,
Come in and rest, old man, and I will gladly mend your shoes before you go on your way.
He then brought the stranger into the hut. No sooner had the old beggar man stepped inside than the dying embers of the fire burst into flames once more. There was now light enough for the cobbler to work by. So he quickly picked up the old, worn-out shoes handed to him by the beggar and patched and mended them as best he could. By the time the job was done, darkness had fallen outside and the light from the fire had gone.
There you are, poor old man,
said the cobbler as he handed back the shoes to the beggar.
I have done my best for you, and I hope you will find the shoes a comfort to you as you go on your way. I have no food to offer you, or I would gladly have given you a meal. There is not even a crust left in the house.
And then, as the old man took back his mended shoes, a wonderful thing happened. Suddenly, a golden light filled the humble room, and where the beggar had lately been, stood a beautiful fairy. She had lovely wings of gold and a bright star on her head. In one hand she held a wand, and in the other a pair of golden shoes. And as the cobbler stared in wonder, the fairy handed him the shoes, saying in the sweetest voice ever hears,
You behold in me, good cobbler, the fairy of reward. I have come to take away your troubles, and to make your heart glad. I came to you in the form of that poor old beggar man, to find out if your heart was truly a loving one, with pity in it for the woes of others. Now I have proved that this is so, and that you will do a kind and helpful deed without payment. So I mean to reward you, and bring joy into your dreary life. Take this pair of magic golden shoes, cobbler, and place them upon your feet, and you will find that everything you tread upon will be changed to gold. This gift is for you alone, for none but you can wear the shoes. Wearing them, you will become rich, and will live in comfort and honor. But bear in mind one thing. Should your riches ever make you proud, or unkind, or selfish, all your gold will vanish away, and leave not a trace behind. Remember my warning, friend. Use well my golden gift, and you may live in peace and comfort. Farewell. Do golden deeds, and be happy.
With these words, the fairy of reward vanished, and the golden light faded away, leaving the room in darkness. For a few moments the cobbler was too dazed to speak or move. Then, bending down, he put the golden shoes on his feet, and, to his great surprise and delight, he found that they fitted him perfectly. Full of glee, he cried aloud,
Go, fetch a light, wife, and let us look at my fairy gift.
Quickly his wife obeyed, for she was just as eager as her husband to look at the magic shoes. As soon as the candle had been lighted, it was found that the fairy had indeed spoken the truth, and that her gift was a real one. For wherever the cobbler trod with the magic shoes, the mark of gold remained. In a very short time there were golden footmarks all over the floor of the hut. For the cobbler and his wife and Sulkiana danced about for joy, feeling sure that their troubles were now at an end. They would soon be rich and happy, they said. Sulkiana was now all smiles and merry chatter. She thought of the pretty frocks she could buy, and of the parties she would go to. Her mother too began to think at once of the good food they would all have to eat next day, and every day that should follow. So it came about that the poor cobbler got no rest that night, for his eager wife kept him on his feet until morning dawned. She made him dance on the chairs and the tables and the beds until they were all changed to solid gold. Then when morning came, she took out some of the smaller pieces of gold and went into the town to buy food for a grand feast. For they were all very hungry by this time. Sulkiana also went out with her mother, as she wished to get rid of her rage at once. And since they bought the richest foods and chose the finest gowns, their change of fortune soon became known to all. It was the talk of the whole town. As they came out from the shops, dressed in silks and laces and jewels, they told the glad news to everyone they met. As the news became known, people came in flocks to see the cobbler and his wonderful magic shoes. When people saw how rich he grew and how endless was his store of gold, they named him the Golden Cobbler. What a fuss they made about him! Everyone begged the three of them to call. After this, they were asked to go out to parties every day. The cobbler was glad to go. But when he paid a visit, his wife always made him wear common shoes, for she did not wish to see other people's floors turned into gold. Sulkiana soon became the gayest of the gay. She could have as many fine frocks and hats and coats and jewels as she pleased. So she now took good care to make herself pretty. But even now she grumbled still, because she had to live in a humble hut. To be sure, it had a golden floor. Yet she and her mother never stopped their scoldings until the Golden Cobbler agreed to have a palace built for them. So a grand palace was built in the midst of a park. After that, the Golden Cobbler hoped that he might be left in peace at last. But no, his wife and his greedy daughter did not mean to let him be idle yet. They made him work from morning till night. Up and down he had to tramp, until the palace, inside and outside, was trodden all to gold. And this was not an easy task by any means, for it was not very nice for the poor cobbler to be held upside down, so that his magic shoes could tread the ceilings and walls into gold. Of course his wife and daughter took great care not to let him fall. If any harm had come to him, there would have been no more gold for them. For, you remember, the magic shoes could not be worn by anyone else. The cobbler did not enjoy such hard work, but he did not refuse to do it. You see, he was just as eager to have a grand home as they were. So up and down he went. At last the glittering palace was ready, and the Golden Cobbler and his family settled down to live in it. First of all, however, they made up their minds that they would give a grand ball. Letters were sent out to all the lords and ladies in the land, asking them to the ball, and they all said they would be glad to come. Then the Golden Cobbler said to his wife,
"We'll ask the king and queen to come, my dear, and to bring with them their son, the gay young prince."
So a letter was sent to the royal palace, and to the great joy of the Golden Cobbler and his family, the king and the queen and the prince sent word that they, too, would be glad to come to the ball. And now Sulkiana was in a great state. She spent a whole week in making up her mind what to wear at the ball, for, of course, she wished to look the prettiest maiden there. First of all, she thought the color should be pink, and then she changed her mind and thought she would have green, and then yellow, and then blue. But at last, when the night of the ball came, she felt sure that all was well, and that she looked quite as grand and pretty as a princess. She had a gay dress of blue satin, with a long train that swept yards behind, quite the longest train in the room. Jewels hung around her neck and arms in chains, and sparkled in her hair like stars. All her sulky looks had gone, and she had such a smiling face that the gay young prince was quite charmed with her. He asked her to dance with him many times, and more than once he kissed her under the mistletoe. Nor did the cobbler waste his time. Dressed in a splendid suit of cloth of gold, he took the king and queen all over his palace and showed them the fine things he had bought. The king and queen nearly lost their breath when they saw his riches. The cobbler's new palace was even finer than their own. Although he had so lately been but a poor humble man, they treated him like a prince. Even when the golden cobbler was so clumsy as to tread upon their royal toes, they did not mind, because, you see, the mark of gold remained. And so the ball was a great success. Now that the ball was over, another bold idea came into the golden cobbler's head.
Since I am the richest man in all the world,
He thought,
why should not my daughter Sulkiana become the prince's bride? She is fair and has finer jewels than any other maiden in the land. True, her temper is not good, but the prince will not mind that when she has so many money bags to bring him.
No sooner said than done. The golden cobbler sent a note to the royal palace, asking the king to let his son marry Sulkiana. When the king had read the letter, he was quite upset.
The very idea of my son, a royal prince, marrying a cobbler's lass.
He stormed.
He ought to be ashamed of himself for even thinking of such a thing. Of course I could not allow it. A cobbler's lass, indeed.
But, my dear, this cobbler is a golden one,
said the queen.
and that makes all the difference. We could not find a richer wife for our son in all the world.
So true was this, that the king quickly changed his mind. It would surely be foolish to refuse so good a chance of never-ending riches. So he gave his consent to the match, and the gay young prince also was quite content to wed with Sulkiana. He did not know that she had a bad temper, because at the ball she had been all smiles and sweetness. An early day was fixed for the wedding. Full of pride and delight, Sulkiana began to get ready for the great event. She bought the gayest gowns made of the richest silks and velvets and laces. Long strings of pearls and other lovely jewels were got for her, and everything else that a pretty maiden could wish to wear. Orders were given for the grandest feast that money could buy, and all the lords and ladies in the land were asked to come. Never had there been such a wedding before, and as the day drew near, people talked of nothing else. And now, Sulkiana and her mother became quite puffed up with pride and held their noses high in the air. They passed all their old friends in the streets without so much as a glance at them. So selfish did they grow that they never thought of anyone's needs but their own. They would not part with any of their gold or food or clothes for the sake of helping the poor. Sad to say, the golden cobbler soon began to act in just the same selfish way. For now he was about to gain the dearest wish of his heart, a royal prince for son-in-law. And he grew so high and mighty that he scarcely saw the ground he trod upon. As he walked in the street, leaving golden footprints wherever he went, he would not nod to anyone less than a duke. Poor people, whom he had known in the old days, he now pushed aside with scorn. Like his greedy wife and daughter, the cobbler became selfish and mean. He never gave a penny to help the poor, but spent all his money on himself. So when, at last, their magic wealth all vanished as suddenly as it had come, the people felt no pity for them. They only laughed and said,
It served them right.
It all came to pass on the evening before Sulkiana's wedding day. Everywhere the golden cobbler went, he seemed to be in people's way. In the big golden halls, the servants in their velvet coats were laying out the feast for the morrow, when in came the master of the house. He bumped into several cooks who were carrying dishes. He put his foot into a jelly that had been left for a moment on the floor and, of course, turned it at once into gold. And then he rushed out of the room and up the stairs. Here he met a host of waiting maids, going up and down with gowns and hats and jewels. But after getting their long trains and sashes wound round his legs, and falling down the stairs twice, he thought it best to stay below. None of the swarms of busy people had even a word for him. Then he flew into a great rage and stormed for the rest of the day. But no one seemed to care two pins whether he was in a bad temper or not. They all had too many other things to think of. So at last the angry cobbler went out in the evening to rest in his golden summer house. As he sat there, he began to think with pride that, after tomorrow, he would be the equal of the king. For his daughter would be wedded to the young prince and would, one day, reign with him as queen. Then a bad thought came into his heart. Why not, with the mighty power that his wealth have him, drive away all the royal family and make himself king instead? A cobbler king. Would not that be better still? So Giddy did this bold plan make the golden cobbler, that he wanted to dance. He was just going out to call for music to be played, when suddenly a beggar appeared before him, a poor man, weary and worn and dressed in rags and tatters. This is what the beggar said.
"Oh, cobbler, cobbler, mend my shoes. I prithee, cobbler, don't refuse. For I have far to go tonight, and my poor shoes are worn out quite."
There was no pity for the poor and needy left in the golden cobbler's selfish heart. Instead of showing kindness, he flew into a rage. To think that anyone should ask him to do such humble work.
"How dare you speak to me thus, you rogue?"
he cried out in angry tones.
"Surely you can see that low and vulgar folk like you have naught to do with a grand lord like me? Go! Mend your horrid shoes yourself, and be off, or I will call my serving man to drive you from my sight with sticks."
But no sooner were these unkind words spoken than a dreadful noise was heard, a mighty rushing wind that knocked the vain and boastful golden cobbler to the ground, flat upon his face. Next moment a dazzling golden light began to shine on all around. The beggar had vanished, and where he had lately stood was now seen the Fairy of Reward. She held in her hands the golden shoes which had been worn so long by the cobbler, and in a sad voice she said,
"Oh, cobbler, although I grieve to take away your golden shoes, I cannot let you have my magic gift another day. For, thought I told you to use your riches well, you have let pride and selfishness drive all the kindness out of your heart. As beggar man, so poor and old, I tried you once again, and, alas, found you selfish and vain. So, since golden shoes and riches have been but a snare, you must now give them up."
With these words, the fairy and the magic shoes vanished, and the golden light died away. When the cobbler rose from the ground, he found that his golden palace and all his riches had gone too. And as he stared at his shoeless feet, his wife and daughter ran to him, weeping with rage and scolding him again, as in the old days. The news was quickly known to all. When the gay young prince was told, he sent a messenger at once to say that he really could not now wed with sulky Anna, since her father's magic wealth had gone. And so the cobbler, with his wife and daughter, went back to dwell once more in the humble hut which had been their home before. Let us hope they learnt their lesson, that love and kindness bring true happiness, not riches and power. At any rate, they never again had the chance to wear the magic shoes, and all because they would not use a golden gift aright.